Oi, boa tarde a todos. Bem-vindo a todos que estão ingressando aqui no nosso webinar. Eu vou dar algumas instruções agora no começo, para quem for entrando. Para quem já participou dos outros, as instruções são as mesmas. Então, mas eu vou falando enquanto vocês vão entrando aqui na sala. Hoje, nossa apresentação sobre o tema é o fim da hora faturável, se isso ou a transformação do seu papel. Então, esse é um tema que a gente tem observado muito e discutido muito até com os nossos clientes. A gente vê que essa é uma questão bem relevante hoje em dia. E, bom, para quem não me conhece, estou vendo aqui no chat algumas pessoas conhecidas. Agora até perdi meu chat aqui, já vou conseguir abrir ele de novo. Meu nome é Rita Standerski. Peter, I think you have your microphone. I hear an echo.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Just a moment. Megan, I can still... No, I'm not hearing myself right now. Okay, thanks. Bom, meu nome é Rita Standerski, eu sou diretora de operações aqui da Goya, consultoria, parceira exclusiva da Ticket no Brasil. A nossa série de webinars, das 10 verdades sobre o lançamento de horas, está sendo apresentada pelo Peter Zver. Ele é presidente da Ticket North America e ele atua há mais de 2 décadas no mercado jurídico norte-americano e europeu. Para esse webinar, a gente está contando com o apoio e a organização também da ILTA, a mais importante associação de tecnologia da área jurídica. A apresentação, pessoal, vai ser feita em inglês pelo Peter, mas vocês têm a opção de ouvi-la em português. Tem um botãozinho aqui na parte inferior do Zoom, que é um globinho, o Interpretation. Então, vocês podem selecionar o português e a gente tem a tradução simultânea, e aí quem quiser pode ouvir em português. Aqui pelo chat eu vou mandar para vocês o link também do nosso site, onde estão os slides em português. Então, o Peter vai fazer a apresentação em inglês. Se vocês quiserem ir seguindo nos slides em português, eu já mando aqui no chat o link e vocês podem baixar o PDF em português. No final do webinar, a gente vai deixar 5 minutos para responder as perguntas que vocês tiverem ao vivo. Então, podem ir escrevendo as perguntas que vocês forem pensando durante a apresentação, escrevam nessa partinha do Q&A, aqui embaixo que tem Q e A. Podem ir escrevendo as perguntas de vocês. No final, a gente lê as perguntas e responde aqui ao vivo. A última informação aqui, antes de eu passar para o Peter, se você perder alguma coisa, não se preocupe, a gente está gravando esse webinar e a gente vai deixar ele disponível depois para vocês, vamos enviar o link por e-mail. Bom, acho que é isso. Até eu estou ansiosa para ver aqui como que o Peter vai apresentar essa questão da hora faturável, né? Qual é o papel dela hoje em dia. Então, vou passar para o Peter. Hi, Peter. It's nice to have you here with us.
Great. Thanks for go ahead.
Yeah, we have some great feedbacks from the first webinar. A lot of people like it and they want to hear more and have more information. So we did. Well, I think they're waiting for you. So okay. I'm not going to talk anymore. So just it's all you now.
Great. Thank you, Rita. Thanks everyone for joining again in this webinar number 2 out of 3. Again, we're going to be talking about 2 truths of timekeeping in a series of 10 that I published about 2 years ago. Today, we're going to be talking about the billable hour and this notion that the end of the billable hour is near. It's been a headline in American legal industry for a long time. And it's important we talk about it and see how the business of law is changing in light of this statement regarding the billable hour. We'll also touch a little bit on compliance and how that plays in the role in today's business of law as well. A thank you to ILTA as well for sponsoring this webinar, and obviously Goya for putting it together. And let's take the show on the road. A little bit of review on webinar 1. for those of you who have missed it, it was probably about 3 weeks ago. One of the truths there is about, obviously timekeeping is a challenging process. One of the key things is defining what good timekeeping actually is. Often at times we've always said, well, we get the hours in at the end of the month and that's good timekeeping. In fact, that does not correlate with good timekeeping. That's just a question of meeting a target. We still don't know the collectability of those hours. And we introduced a measure called lag to capture as a metric that is much more tied into measuring timekeeping performance and addressing the question of what is good timekeeping. And we call this measure a lag to capture. How many days does it take to register the work? If I put in work, if I register Monday's work on Friday, I have a lag of 4 days, which is quite poor. If I register same day, it's a lag of 0, which is quite good. At the end of the day, if the lag metric is good, i.e. it's very low, near 0, then that contributes to quality, that contributes then to trust in the invoicing process. So we are promoting this lag to capture. A lot of timekeeping technology make sure that this metric is front and center, and a lot of firms are using this metric as part of their analytics and performance evaluations. So that was truth number 6. We also spoke last week, not last week, maybe 3 weeks ago, about another truth about how do we motivate. We all have the challenge of getting time in. It's not a popular task. The professionals are busy. They're engaged with clients. Sometimes timekeeping can be an afterthought. We've been using in the past, and I've been in the industry for 20 years, and the stick has been used quite a lot, and understandably so. You know, it's a difficult process. The technology was quite basic. So obviously, you know, sort of the penalty approach was used. We're seeing more and more, some of the progressive firms are looking at the carrot, meaning it's rewarding the users, using the metric as a motivator. I always equated in the first webinar to the steps in your fitness app. It motivates, it's one number that motivates. And we could apply some of that consumer tech and metric to the business. And we've obviously connected to timekeeping here. So that simple metric, making sure everybody's aware of it, making sure that the technology is now part of the equation, you could start moving towards a carrot approach. And a lot of firms are starting to do that, as opposed to, you know, penalizing financially, penalty-wise, locking computers, et cetera, et cetera. They're using more of a carrot approach and rewarding people for behavior and measuring it, obviously, with something that's very objective. And as I alluded to in the previous truth, good technology plays a role. So I'm sure a lot of you, when you get a new tool, you want to do the job because you want the tool is helping you achieve the result. Same with here, you know, the right tool, i.e. the right technology, the right metric, accessibility, as you can see in this little example, it makes things easy, and it can act as a motivator to get the job right. So the right tool is very important. And when we say the right tool, it's got to be accessible, okay? It's got to be personal, and it's got to be easy, okay? Accessible, personal, easy. Those are 3 things that we look at. And in technology, I mean, that's the whole idea. You want to be able to get to the application. You want to get to the recording. You want to make it easy. It's got to be in vision all the time. It's got to be personal. You got to feel, it's got to be part of you. The application or the technology has to talk to you, or you have to have a conversation with the technology, as opposed to a difficult journey with some of the technologies in the past. And obviously it's got to be easy so that I don't have to waste time. And I always say, if you're looking at technology, you got to look at accessibility and usability, and then look at the deep functionality. A lot of times we look at the deep functionality, but there's diminishing returns if you can't access it in reasonable amounts of time, or the distance is far away. So that's important. So accessible, personal, easy, that's what contributes to the technology, and that can integrate into more of a carrot approach in terms of motivation. Moving on to this webinar. So that was a review of the previous webinar. We're going to talk about the billable hour. And this was truth number one in that article that I published. Before we even talk about it, I'd like to go through a little bit of history. In fact, pre-1960, there was fixed fee billing going on. It was very regulated. This is, and I'm talking here in North America, particularly the US legal industry. So it was very regulated. It was a price book, very standard. And that system changed in the 1960s to a billable hour model. The reason was for value, to demonstrate more value. And that model, billable hour, has existed to today. And it's still very prominent in the industry. So the billable hour is not dead, so to speak. And we'll talk about a little bit in a second about how it's being transformed. In the 1990s, into 2000, we had the introduction of alternate fee arrangements, i.e. what we call now fixed fees. So we're going back to pre-1960, but this is more of it's not from a regulatory body, but it's much more about the client demanding fixed fees so they can predict their legal spend better. The financial crisis of 2008 even accelerated this because it became, obviously cost containment was, top of mind in the CEOs of major organizations, and legal spend was one of the areas where there was quite a lot of scrutiny going on, and the alternate fee arrangement really got amplified in that period. And obviously has increased. If you look on the right-hand side, in the AmLaw 100, 74 mention the availability of alternate fee arrangements as part of their service offerings. So they're using it in terms of making sure that they're demonstrating clients have options in how they transact with their law firms. And obviously, firms have to stay competitive. In 1995, the electronic billing was introduced, and along with electronic billing, a uniform code set was also published. There's a link here below, right here, if you want to look at the standard codes that are being used in North America, particularly in the US. And that added a lot of overhead into the time capture process. I would say it's 100% extra overhead. 2 or 3 more fields per transaction were added because of that. And the reason behind the UTBMS code set is so that law firm clients can compare value from all their service providers on an equal like-for-like basis. They want to compare orange to oranges all the time in terms of the legal spend. So they're imposing certain uniform task codes to be added to every transaction. So that became prominent. Obviously, it added complexity to the timekeeping process. The billable hour obviously was always a revenue motive. That was the era of billable hours. If we want to increase revenue, we increase rates, and we bill the hours. And it was a very simple formula. The alternate fee arrangement era, again, we're talking 2000 and beyond, there was a cost motive that was introduced, meaning we have to understand our costs because our clients are demanding fixed fees. So the cost motive is much more challenging in business. Anybody who can understand costs well can have a competitive advantage, and likewise, law firms are no different. Okay, it's much more related to a typical manufacturing process where you can't price anything unless you know your costs. And that obviously makes you understand margins and profitability. So the cost motive is introduced, and that's where timekeeping was amplified, or the importance of timekeeping and the granularity of capture and the codification of time is becoming much more strategic to support the cost motive, okay? So on first glance, I remember when we started in the 2000s, when AFA came in, a lot of management partners says, well, this is great, that timekeeping can move away, until they realize, how important it has become. So on first glance, it looked like we don't have to timekeep because we can bill on fixed fees. On second glance, it was, my goodness, we better timekeeping at a level that is even more, important than in the revenue motive era. So it's becoming much more strategic simply because of the data that it creates. So it's not going away, but it's transforming its role a little bit. So I always say the billable hour, the word billable hour, you can say it's dead, but it's more of a transformation into the hour. A professional service industry is now understanding that the hour is the unit of measure. It is the metric. So in the past, we were all concerned with the billable hour. We captured the billable hour, whereas now we're capturing the hour. And there's a distinction here, because that hour contributes to that data source. That data source is very valuable. Understanding that data, utilizing and leveraging that data for pricing, future pricing and bidding and for work is important. And that gives you the insight to, competitiveness and margin. So the takeaway here is capture all hours to create a rich data source for billing, pricing, costing, and profitability. In the past, I would stop, capture billable hours to create the data source for billing. Whereas now this sentence has been extended. We capture all hours, billable, non-billable, whatever it takes to run the business, because you don't know when you need that data in the future. So more and more firms are looking at more a holistic approach in terms of tracking hours and work being done, irrespective of if it's billable or not, because it contributes to the cost motive. We're moving on to compliance, okay? So in summary, I'll summarize, I'll just go back one more thing. It's about data now, and timekeeping contributes to that data. 100% recognition of all work done is important. Even if you don't know its use, there will be a use down the road, and it's better to have it than not to have it, is really the takeaway here. As far as compliance, again, this goes back to the control of legal spend and the relationship between the law firm and its clients. We want quality in the delivery of the invoice. Quality starts with the timekeeping process. A lot of firms, even post in the billable era, billable hour era, you have internal, what we call firm imposed compliance, meaning here are some examples where we want the narrative to be a certain length. We want certain words to be used and certain words not to be used. We want minimum values, maximum values controlled. We want to control how far back our timekeepers can go to put in time, because quality is directly related to the lag, as we spoke about. So those are some of the firm imposed internal compliance metrics. But over and above that, now the clients are involved and they're saying, well, we want this and these specifics in terms of compliance as they relate to the recognition of work or the time entries. i.e. minimum increments, who can work on the file, what kind of experience levels are allowed. I don't want 4 partners and 1 associate. I want 1 partner, 5 associates, and 4 paralegals working on the file, so that, you know, the cost structure is much more plausible for the firm's client. Again, the narrative length, restrictions, what can be said, what cannot be said, what level of detail should be there. And of course, the famous base and task codes. Those are the extra coding that is required simply so that the law firm's clients can apply analytics and understand, you know, and compare across law firms in terms of what value they're getting in the type of transactions they're engaging their counsel with. And block billing is another famous one, which is really about injecting multiple entries into a single time entry. The reason it's part of the compliance process and often restricted is because law firm clients want the granularity, and they want those face and task codes applied to each little unit so they could do a good review and analysis. If everything's blocked into one, there's a little bit of contamination in that exercise. So these are things that are now client imposed. So there's a lot of compliance effort being imposed on this process. And it's increasing, you know, because of that scrutiny of the client in terms of understanding their legal spend. But all of this contributes to quality, okay? And trust. So if you understand compliance and you could put in the right processes, obviously that invoice will speak well and project well in the relationship. As far as applying it strategically, and this is a slide, I believe it's Thomson Reuters. I don't think I earmarked it, but it's out of Thomson Reuters e-billing hub. The costs increase over time. Errors caught in time entry take a few minutes to fix, whereas any errors on appeal, and once you get client involved, it can be expensive. Not only expensive financially and time consuming, but also in terms of expensive in the relationship. You want compliance addressed early, specifically inside the law firm, and not having to get the client engaged in a dispute, and a lot of rejections, delays in the invoice delivery. It gets extremely expensive. So moving the compliance process down into what we call the low cost zone is very, very important. And hopefully any compliance that can go right to the beginning of the transaction cycle, i.e. time entry, that's where you want, that's what you want, because that's the lowest cost. And hopefully, you know, not engage in too much compliance issues or rejection or invoice rejections at this level, which gets expensive. And like I said, expensive financially and also expensive in terms of relationship. As far as the process, again, in terms of compliance, and this is quite important here, is I always like to distinguish capture with compliance. You know, we want to capture, and remember I said usable, accessible, easy, personal. We want to get the event in. Do we have to be compliant at that stage? The answer is no. This is where we want to make sure we maximize every activity, maximize the revenue opportunity at this stage. So we want things to be easy, accessible, and get things in. And then we have the validation compliance process where we codify, we apply the codes, we transform it into a valid entry, and then we transform it into a compliant entry, where we apply some of the rules the client has imposed, so that when we get to the billing part, we have a 99.5% compliant entry, meaning the invoices are flowing through the system. And remember, this is all electronic billing now, and they're not being rejected. So, where we want to avoid compliance at billing as much as we can, We want to move that exercise down into the timekeeping zone, but at the same time in the timekeeping zone, we have to be cognizant of the distinction between capture and compliance and not try to do them at the same time. We want to separate these two so we could maximize the value of each of these, okay? And that's all through workflow. You know, good workflow and the right technology can achieve this very, very well. So a couple of examples, and I used this example in the last webinar, but this is capture. Accessible, personal, easy. You know, there's no compliance going on here. This is simply, I got to get information in. I'm working, I'm in an email, I'm in Word, I'm engaging with clients, I'm busy, I'm in transit, I want to register work, okay? Picture this being, you know, a compliance type screen, it would be very difficult. So something of this sort, it demonstrates capture, and it also demonstrates how we're isolating the capture process to make it simple. Compliance, on the other hand, is now at a level where there's a little bit more complexity here, but we've already addressed capture. So the inventory is there, the opportunity is there, the revenue is there. Now we need to pass it through compliance. And there's 3 levels of compliance that I always like to address is awareness. More and more, the idea of interlacing the capture process with information, awareness information. What should we do for this file? What should we be aware of? How should we register? Are there any guidelines? You know, so the idea of making people aware of certain requirements or certain ways of registering time or restrictions, that's number 1, okay? Next one, often at times we see acknowledgement. We're seeing more and more, well, I want to make sure that our user base has understood and read some of these guidelines, you know, because it's important, you know, it's the idea of, yes, one thing is being aware, but the organization or the firm wants to have evidence of acknowledgement that people have bought into and read some of the guidelines for certain files. And again, that's all can be registered, interlaced in the compliance validation process. And the thirdly, obviously, is the validation, okay? And the validation can be very, very granular. This is where we hold back the entries until we achieve that 99.5% compliance level so that, you know, we have a good chance that that invoice will move through the validation process or the client's screening process, and obviously end up as collected. And that validation could, you know, checking words, checking fields, checking dates, any validation exercise that is either internal, i.e. firm imposed, or external, client imposed. And of course, that could be different validations for different clients or even different cases or matters. That should be accomplished here. So awareness, acknowledgement, and validation. 3 levels of compliance, all done at the time capture phase prior to billing. So we're nearing the end. Let's summarize today. The billable hour is not dead. It still exists. We say the role has been transformed to simply hour. I like saying the unit of measure in the professional service organization is the hour. Let's capture it and let's use it as a very competitive data source for addressing the cost motive. And again, that contributes to the AFA era, our alternate fee arrangement or fixed fee pricing. And obviously time data is key to firms' competitiveness. You know, the more granular, the more accurate, the more use it as a source for the future, the more competitive you are against your peers. The compliance process 3 levels: awareness, acknowledgements, and validation. And, you know, it's important that we separate compliance from capture to optimize revenue. So the last point says, you know, compliance has its place, quick capture has its place. It's got to be in the right place in the workflow to achieve success on both fronts. And that's it for today. We welcome any questions at this time.
Thank you a lot, Peter. I think that was really something that here in Brazil, we are seeing and also discussing this with our clients, and the importance of having this data. And that's not about billable hours that you send to your clients and they pay for the hours you work. It's about the data. And you mentioned in the beginning of your presentation about the firms knowing their costs and being able, let me turn on, and being able to know the cost for a matter or for a client. So it's something that we are actually talking about here in Brazil. So thank you for your presentation today. I can see that people are still here, so I'm gonna send on the chat the link for them to register for the next webinar. We don't have any questions right now, so if you think, oh, I just have one question. Let me read it in Portuguese and I'll translate it to you, Peter, just a moment. So, como motivar os advogados a efetuar os lançamentos corretamente dentro do prazo? Okay, so Paulo Hapner made a question here. I think it's, I don't know if you saw our first webinar, Paulo, but I'll let Peter answer this. So he's asking how to motivate lawyers to really do their timesheets correctly, in respecting the deadlines. We really addressed that in the first webinar, but I'll refresh you a little bit. And that's all about, again, you know, motivating through a carrot, meaning give them the right technology, making sure the firm promotes a good metric. And we've seen firms where, you know, that metric has become the motivator, just like steps in a fitness application. You know, we have a firm average, we have practice group averages. We want lawyers, you know, there is a sense of competition all the time. And the idea of understanding a metric and how important that is to the organization, and then making sure that it's visible and everybody's aware of it. And that goes right to their consumer devices and the portal or the internet. Once that unit of measure is there and supported with good technology, you know, meaning easy to capture, you would see the changes. And, you know, in webinar 1, they did this study in health about the value of the fitness app and the measure of steps and how it motivated people to become more fit, because they started competing with themselves, you know, and creating that type of motivation can be done in a law firm as well, especially with the persona of the lawyer who, you know, highly intellectual, you know, very engaged, very understands, you know, the role very well. And I think there is opportunity there to take that sort of that notion of the step into the notion of the timekeeping metric, and then having the right tools to do the job. You know, you know, and it's just starting. I mean, if I would go take a survey of firms, even in the US, I would say the stick is probably still 80%, you know, as opposed to the carrot, meaning, you know, but strategically the carrot will probably, if you have the right elements, achieve better and create a better environment also for the firm. You know? He's also asking after this question, if it will be right to have a system of giving bonus for people that do this rightly,
That's a very good point, because we've had, so that's more towards the carrot now. Again, we've had people, you can introduce the metric and inject the metric into the compensation formula as a weight in their end of year bonus. But you got to introduce the metric, everybody has to buy into it. And then once people are engaged, the person who's done the most steps at the end of the year gets a little bit more of this element of bonus versus the other person.
Yeah.
So, but like I said, you need a metric, and people have to understand the metric. Otherwise, it doesn't work. But we've seen the metric in the compensation formula already.
Okay, we already passed 5 minutes from our time, but I can see that people are still here in our room. There is one last question, Peter, and let me know if you want to address it now or if you want to talk on the next one. It's a person, Milton is asking, the tips for a law firm that do not use timesheets.
Okay, well, so maybe it's a certain practice of law, why they don't use timesheet, or
I don't know, Milton, if you want to add more information from your, to add to your question, because he just wrote like, he wants tips for law firms that are not used to use timesheets.
Well, the whole idea is I always say, you have to, if you want to, any tip has to connect to the client relationship. If you're going to introduce timesheets and how do you connect that value to the client relationship and revenue? And you got to justify the work. You want to be transparent with your clients. So there's got to be a value proposition connected to your law firm client relationship. So you got to start there. That's how you're going to introduce timesheets, because people won't do it if they haven't done it in the past. So how is their relation with their client going to be better using a timesheet approach, or even a fixed fee approach backed up by timesheets, versus not using them at all and just speculating on fees. So and more now in the times we're living in, it always takes a disruptive state, i.e. the financial crisis of 2008. It's amazing how many law firms engaged in more accurate timekeeping. We are having a crisis going on right now. That's maybe an opportunity to say, hey, we got to manage our business properly. Back to the cost equation, back to the law firm relationship. There's a business case that has to be driven here. And these are the times where sometimes it's a little bit easier to introduce these concepts. But I always say it's got to connect to revenue and the client relationship, and build a business case on there. But I could take that one offline to understand better why timesheets are not being used,
Yeah, and their practice and how to make this important. Because sometimes it's like you said, it's the relation with the client that's gonna give the direction the firm needs. Yep,
it's got to connect to that. It's not about, here, we're going to introduce this because we want to, but it doesn't connect to anything. It won't. It has got to connect to a value proposition to the client. And hopefully, I would say you could win on the relationship and you could win on revenue. Accurate timekeeping means, one, more revenue, more transparency, more trust, better relationships. So you could win on relationship and you could win on revenue, but it's got to be done strategically and a lot of good communication and, and a good business case.
Okay, so I want to thanks everybody that is still here. So people are still here in our room. I think it's a very important theme that we are talking here. Peter is going to address a couple more truths we are talking about on the next webinar, and we're going to have a fourth one also to show you a little bit more. But feel free to write us if you have any more questions that we didn't address here. We are over our time for 10 minutes, and I'm very happy for that, because I can see that people are really interested in that. So I'll change it to Portuguese again.
Go ahead.
Okay,
Go
Peter.
ahead. No worries.
Então,
Thank
pessoal, thank you, Peter. Eu deixei o link para a gravação do webinar 1, que bastante gente me escreveu aqui que não viu. Então, tá o link do YouTube para vocês verem a gravação do primeiro webinar. A gente está à disposição para tirar dúvidas que vocês tenham, se vocês quiserem conversar um pouco mais sobre o tema. Eu estou colocando aqui também o meu e-mail. Fiquem à vontade para me escrever. Eu e o Peter estamos à disposição de vocês. Tem mais uma pergunta aqui. Eu não sei se vocês... Peter, would you have a couple more minutes? Because I have one more question. And
Sure,
whoever
sure.
wants to stay here with us can stay a little bit more. Okay?
No problem. No worries.
So Nelson is asking, if the main costs of the firm are considered on the... Okay, I'll read it in Portuguese first. Just read it. Translation at the same time is not my main job. Just a moment. Se os custos gerais do escritório são considerados no valor da hora faturável. Okay. So, if the fixed costs of the firm, of the office, the overhead, if they are considered in the billable hour.
The fixed costs, I mean, that is obviously part of a cost rate that is established. What we're trying to do, I would say no. I would say the fixed cost is a cost rate of the lawyer, okay? And the cost rate is compared to the realization rates. We want to make sure our realization rate is as high as possible. We've had firms in the US that took the lag metric, the lag metric by lawyer. So lawyer A has a lag of 4 days. Lawyer B has a lag of 0.5 days. Typically, they correlated the lag to realization, meaning at the end of the day, the person realized a better rate at the end of the collection process with whoever has the lowest lag had usually a higher realization. So we typically use the lag metric as timekeeping performance. It correlates to the realization rate. The realization rate is compared to a cost rate, and that's the margin per lawyer that you make. But the overhead contributes to a cost rate. What we're saying here, let's just make sure that we capture all hours so that we have the total cost of work applied to the matter. That could be the project management, that could be project management, that could be litigation, some litigation support work, whatever, depending on the practice. It's not just the actual timekeepers or fee earners that are involved. Everybody should be involved in costing the matter properly. But I would apply the overhead of the firm into a cost rate per lawyer, and every firm should be doing that, having a cost rate per lawyer.
So thank you a lot, Peter. I want to thank everybody that came here and stayed here with us. I'm sorry for the minutes that we passed, but I think people were really engaged here. So I hope to see you guys again. Okay, I'll switch to Portuguese again.
Okay.
Então, espero ver vocês todos de novo no dia 17. A gente mudou a data desse próximo webinar. Agora, me esqueci qual era a data anterior, mas prestem atenção. Então, é dia 17 de setembro, na mesma hora. Eu coloquei o link para vocês se inscreverem aqui no chat, para se inscrever para o próximo, e o link da gravação do primeiro. Depois a gente vai mandar por e-mail para vocês, aí eu mando o link do primeiro, o link desse segundo e o link para se inscrever, tudo organizadinho. Tá bom? Muito obrigada a todos. Thank you, Peter. And see you again on the next one.
Absolutely a pleasure.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.